Well, is it worth the opposite of truth to success? Can we lie our way to success, and is it worth it? You know, I don't know if you've seen the news lately. Obviously, we record these things a little bit ahead of time, and so around the time of this recording, the New York Governor General has announced that they are suing the Trumps, Donald Trump and his children, for fraud. $250 million lawsuit for fraud. Because the argument is, not argument, there is kind of facts, and like we always say, when we talk politics, we are not political, but let's see what we can learn from this as leaders. Donald Trump has presented valuations of his properties. This is just a small example of bigger fraud that's happening. I don't know the facts. I'm only seeing what's being presented, but like Mar-a-Lago, which was recently raided by the FBI. Apparently, he valued it at about $750 million to get some cheap loans, and apparently the place is only worth about $75 million. His apartment, apparently he rated it as something like $327 million, and it's only worth about a third of that. And then he said the square footage was like 3 times what it was, or whatever. And there's all these examples of buildings that he's valued at 10 times what it's worth, so that he can get more favorable loans and kind of prove himself to be more successful. I mean, Dr. Rod, my thought, sorry, it's not my thought. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here for but isn't it the bank's responsibility to make sure that they research what the value of a property is, and he may truly believe in his heart that the place is worth that much. But isn't that just how business is done? Is it okay for us to do these little? I mean, it's not really hurting anyone, is it? Right? It's just him getting a little bit of a cheaper loan and kind of getting a little bit more media of how rich he is. It's okay to do a little white lie to be successful, isn't it?
Well, the problem with little white lies is they eventually become big fat lies.
Yes.
Things get more and more complicated over time, and you tend to have to tell bigger lies to cover up those little white lies from the past. Of course, we don't really know the truth of these allegations, and obviously Donald Trump is a hugely divisive and controversial figure politically. And there can be little doubt that there are plenty of political axes being ground
Yes.
to try to pull him down, and in particular to prevent him from running for the presidency in the elections in 2024. So there's all that in the background, which I think raises a whole range of ethical issues.
Yeah.
But to cut to the chase in terms of how you value your own assets for the purposes of loans, I think, this gets back to the whole thing about honest weights and measures, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The Lord hates dishonest weights and measures. So I think what we need to do, in leaders, if we're in business, is to be honest and then to trust God for the outcome. In response to your issue about, the banks should do their homework, they should.
Yeah.
Indeed, they should. And that they should be aware that it's always in the interests of the borrower to paint as favourable picture as they possibly can of their asset position. And, I think painting a favourable picture and telling white lies are different things.
Yeah.
So, painting a favourable picture could be as simple as, looking optimistically towards the future in terms of your projected future earnings and so on. But what do? You make sure you've listed all the assumptions that you're making. So if somebody wants to question those assumptions, they can do that.
Yeah.
In the case of valuation of property, I would always suggest that you use a recent valuation.
Yeah.
If you're a very large organisation, you're going to have to be doing that in any case, generally speaking, to satisfy tax law and so on and so forth. So I think the general principle would be steer clear of lying, even little white lies, because eventually you're going to have to tell a big fat lie to cover up a whole series of little white lies.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the Bible really distinguishes between white lies and big fat lies. They're all lies.
Yes.
And a lying tongue is something which is detestable. So we do need to avoid it. I know we can come under a lot of pressure. We can come under a lot of pressure because we really, really, really need a loan or we need to minimize our tax payment. But look, it just gets back to, I think, be honest and then trust the Lord. And look, even if you do end up in a pretty sticky situation, still trust the Lord.
Yeah,
trust the Lord and rejoice in Him
Yep.
always. And look, that is so easy to say. I'm a pastor. I can say that up in front of a congregation every week. But when you actually confront it, that's when it becomes really, really difficult. It is the easiest thing in the world to say. Be honest and trust in God. And I know I've said this on earlier podcasts, Craig, that it is easy to say. But one of the virtues of saying it often enough is that we will believe it. And when we find ourselves in a sticky situation, we can actually put it into operation.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I must admit, I do find myself in that position, trying to, I suppose, force the situation. You know, like kind of. Well. I'll help God out a little bit, I suppose, is the Christian way to say it. But I have learned to not worry about the success. Just focus on, this is my call. This is my purpose. This is what God has called me to. If God has called me to it, now I don't truly believe is like, if it's God's will, it's God's bill. Kind of yes, but there's still consequences to our own decisions and poor decisions and stuff like that. But I have had to, especially in this season of building this app and launching this program and everything like that, it's just been, I mean, I could really force the issue, but I don't want to run ahead of God. And there's been a lot of things, as you know, you've been part of this journey and some of the all of the many challenges we've had in launching this. I've always tried to, like, no, I just got to be patient. I'm not going to rush it. If I rush it, it won't be up to standard. And now that it's launched, there's still a lot of work to do. There's still much more to be done to it, and there's more features going to be added and everything like that. But for now, it's like, you know what? If it had been launched earlier, I wouldn't have been ready for it. So if I had have tried to rush the scenario. But I want to go back to, you know, the lying stuff, because I have a confession. When I was younger and when I was a child, I was a compulsive liar. Compulsive. And I'm trying to think how old I was, but I think I was reasonably young when I had the revelation. And I don't know whether I was around about 10. Maybe I was 12, 13, or maybe I was a little bit younger, but I was compulsive. My parents would be like, "Did you do that?" And I'd be like, "No." And not only would I just say no to avoid getting in trouble, I'd make up a story as well. And like I knew, like I just knew, and then I'd just keep telling another story and another story and another story. Many times I would just find myself so caught up in excessive lies, really bad lies. And I remember this one day, I went to kind of, I suppose, support a lie that I had told, and I couldn't remember what story I had actually told. I'm like, which lie had I actually told? And I realized in that moment, I'm like, you know what? This whole lying thing is so much harder because I have to keep lying on top and create a new story. And then it takes up so much brain power to try to remember which lie I had told when and which. And I'm like, it's just easier just to say the truth. Even if you get in trouble, it's just easier. And so I learned from a young age that lies just aren't worth it. And yes, you may get immediate success or perceived success out of it. And like you said, this, who knows what's true out of it. Obviously, Trump has had a lot of controversy around him for many years around the fact that everything is all a facade and everything like that. I mean, not all of it can be a facade. Like, there is some wealth there. I mean, he flies a private jet. I don't have one, so he's obviously wealthier than me, you know. He has a couple of buildings, you know. Even if they're not his, he has his name on them. It's better. It's more than what I've got, right? So even if this stuff isn't true, the idea of us, because let's bring it back to just us as leaders, it can be very easy for us to overinflate our situation. Number of people at church, like, you know, we report on our numbers and we kind of average them out and we round up and maybe we accidentally counted a few people twice and maybe we count all the kids with the adults or what, like, I don't know, like there's, we all know the stories of inflating church numbers and things like that and people always overinflate on social media what their lifestyle is and everything like that. Just be careful as leaders. Be very careful of what lie you're putting out, because as Dr. Rod said, all lies are equal, right? It's not like there's a big lie and a little lie. To Jesus, they're all lies, and Jesus says lies just don't get into heaven. Luckily, we serve under the grace of God and not our own good works. So. Good. That's it. That's a good result. But it's very important for us to state the truth everywhere that we go. Going back to the previous thing, like the Dr. always says, it can't be interpreted. Like, you don't want someone to even think or to be able to interpret that you've lied, because if you're building your success in leadership, if you're overinflating your influence, if you're pushing forward your agenda more than it really should be, you're building your success on a foundation of lies. You're building your success on almost like Jesus saying, you're building your success on the sand, right? Rather than on solid rock. And what's the solid rock? Is Jesus, and Jesus is the truth. So is lying worth the success? I would say not, because it eventually comes back to bite you. So, Dr. Rod, final thoughts on lying for success?
Well, I agree with you, Craig. The only thing I would say, just bearing in mind our earlier conversation about controversy and success, there may be some circumstances under which lying is okay. And one such circumstance that comes to mind is Rahab.
Okay.
Rahab, who finds herself in the line of descendancy to Jesus, of course, she lied to protect the spies that Joshua had sent into the city.
Wow.
So there may be some circumstances, but she certainly wasn't using lying for her own personal success. She was doing it for a different reason altogether. So we do need to just make sure that, whatever we do it in line with the Word of God. But absolutely, you're right that in terms of building up our own following, say on social media, or building up our own name, our own brand, then lying is something that should not be in our toolbox.
Hey, did you like that video? If so, give us a thumbs up and put a comment below and share your thoughts on the topic. This is an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast, and if you'd like to watch the full episode, please click through to check out our channel and consider subscribing, or watch the next video.